Tarumbeta italia katika anga.
Like this. That is how the trumpet will sound.
Konene. So jana Ruto alikuwa na a meeting na UDA leaders at State House. And one of the things that stood out for a lot of people, ilikuwa ni story ya Wamushomba. And Wamushomba like could declare that she's back in UDA. But before to check hiyo, wacha nibonge juu ya what stood out to me. Because what stood out to me was just a very simple sentence. And even when I was watching mainstream media, they did not focus on this sentence. But this is a sentence that I've heard repeated so many times by so many different people, even the so-called intellectuals. And what sentence am I talking about? The sentence nabonga juu yake ni kuna kuagana this notion that's pushed around in Africa that somehow the fact that democracy wagena mean that leaders can be challenged means that democracy can't work. And Ruto, kumekuwa na a lot of fear that Ruto anataka kuturudisha back to siku za Moi. Of course amekuwa kideny sana, amekuwa akisema that wasa wanafikiria hivyo when he talks about these plans of turning Kenya into a first world country in 30 years time. When people question like 30 years, are you planning to stay longer than you're supposed to? Yuko nyi kuendeni huko. But yesterday he said something very interesting.
The countries that have succeeded, either they have succeeded because they are a dictatorship, where once the leader says we are going here, you cannot say no and you cannot question. That is one way of moving the country forward. For us, we don't have that luxury.
So, unachikia hapo akisema for us we do not have that luxury. And but what was interesting was you could see the crowd was confused because this is their leader. They are wondering, should we clap or shouldn't we clap? And nimesikia argument made by a lot of people that what Kenya needs is a benevolent dictator. What Kenya needs is a dictator. And I'd have to look at Ruto before I answer this question. I'd have to look at Ruto's record and say, sawa, we need a dictator. Why do we feel we need a dictator? Tunafeel tuna need dictator because atasaidia kufight corruption. Ita bring more efficiency. Ita bring all these things that a dictator is supposed to do. But then the question would be, when William Ruto won the elections in 2022, who did he appoint in his cabinet? He appointed someone who had a murder case. He appointed someone who had a rape case. He appointed a bunch of people who had corruption cases. And what happened when these people came into the cabinet? The corruption cases continued. Their murder cases were dropped, the rape cases were dropped, and all this. So the question is, if you can't do this when it's a democracy, if a democracy means that hawezi pata a Kenyan who does not have an attempted rape case, hawezi pata a Kenyan who does not have an attempted murder case, what makes us think that ukiwa a dictator now you're going to do something different? So hii argument inakuwa a very, I always call it is a lazy argument. And the reason why I feel also that it's a lazy argument is we also exist, we live in a country where elections are like no one trusts anyone. So elections are stolen. We've seen elections stolen in this country. And if elections are stolen, it means that the person that the people chose does not end up being the leader. So is that a democracy? Yeah, unacheki. Tukiangalia Uganda na tuangalia Tanzania, do we think they're democracies? But someone can argue that Tanzania has had benevolent dictators. Because what's the definition of a benevolent dictator? Because I always find it to be very interesting, especially when people start unajua kusema tuna need dictator. Because even when it comes to history ya Ruto, I think msali kwa post ilikuwa msee anaitwa Onjolo Kenya, na alikuwa ameandika and they all clapped because wasa wali clap after Ruto kubonga juu ya dictatorship. Alafu George I. Watson akaandika, my dream is about to be realized. Ruto needs to quit playing and morph into a full-blown dictator. It's the only way forward. George I. Watson is one of those people who uses freedom of expression and he maximizes it. And I think when he thinks about Ruto turning into a full-blown dictator, he's thinking about it from the point of a Kenyan living in America. Because he himself, if he was to live in Kenya 24/7, he would not want to live in a dictatorship, because a dictatorship means nothing can be questioned, and if anything is questioned, it can lead to death. That's what was often like this. There's this romanticized version where this dictator only goes after corrupt people. No, let's even go to TZ and look at the dictator who worked the most, anaitwa Magufuli. Magufuli's time will coincide in a lot of disappearances, and these disappearances that happened under Magufuli have been happening even under these other bad dictators. But with that in mind, wacha tuangalie the definition of a benevolent dictator. So a benevolent dictator is an authoritarian leader who holds absolute political power but is perceived to exercise it for the benefit of the population rather than personal gain. Often viewed as an alternative to stalled democracies, these leaders prioritize efficiency, economic growth, and social stability, though usually at the cost of civil liberties. Then kakwa definition, an autocrat whose in theory good intentions result in improved living conditions for their citizens. So let's look at this. Alafu ikapatiana history, kuna mtu kama Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore is among the most cited, along with Mustafa Kemal wa Turkey, Josip Broz wa Yugoslavia, and Franz Albert Rene wa Seychelles. Okay, I can even go as far as quoting Umse wa Rwanda, Kagame, as a benevolent dictator. And Kagame has done a lot for his country. One thing I know is he's not used it for personal gain. Najua wasusamaga he's the richest, nini, but him compared with the Rutos of this world, he's not used it for personal gain. So this is what I'd wonder. I'd ask myself, if so far Ruto has used public funds for personal gain, if he was to become a benevolent dictator, what would happen? His appetite for public funds is just supposed to disappear, and he's supposed to turn and morph into this perfect guy. But this benevolent dictator thing, like if there is someone who was pushing this narrative and who all of a sudden has changed kabisa, of course ni Ndindi Nyoro. Ndindi Nyoro hata kulikuwa na hii time ilikuwa ni tuko walikuwa meka Kiharu MP Ndindi Nyoro called on Uhuru Kenyatta to disregard the Supreme Court ruling and rule like an African dictator. This was in 2017. Kumbuka, when he was supporting Uhuru. Then in 2019, bado he wrote an article for The Nation. The article ilikuwa ni Ndindi Nyoro says democracy is not serving Kenya well. Acheki. And he even went as far as going to TV station, kwani TV47, and when he was asked about this, he still insisted, and his insistence was on this person, this benevolent dictator, because we like hyping this benevolent dictator. So wacha tusikize Ndindi Nyoro.
Ndindi,
Yes.
I can't speak on his behalf.
Yes.
He has a right to.
Yeah.
I can speak on behalf of the channel.
Yes.
And I can authoritatively say he has not been assigned by the deep state. But nonetheless, Ndindi,
Yeah.
you talk of the Moi Kenya.
Yeah.
You make reference
Let
to
me respond
China.
a
Yes.
bit.
That is in contrast opinion
Yeah.
to what you said in 2017
Yes.
at a personal level.
Exactly.
Two articles that
Yes.
will forever be quoted in as far as your political career is concerned.
Yes.
It's you, Ndindi, who said, and I quote, "What this country needs is a benevolent dictator with a clear mission of making Kenya great. He should appoint judges," you said, "order hanging of the corrupt and oversee a cleanup of the system." You also said on 22nd of
Yeah.
September 2017,
Yeah.
"We should at this time enhance the power of the presidency, choosing our security bosses, Supreme Court judges, top officials of commissions and other influential persons should be," you said, "the prerogative of the president." This is a contrast opinion to what you held back 2 years ago, isn't it?
Abubakar, I've always gotten that kind of feedback.
So utachekia hapa vile atajitetea. So umecheki all the things that he wanted this benevolent dictator to have, all these powers. This is when he was supporting Uhuru Kenyatta. Then what happened? At some point he was supporting Ruto. But right now what has happened, he's not longer supporting Ruto. Now Ruto is talking about a dictator being the solution. So I'd want to know, does Ndindi Nyoro still think this way? Nachiki, because inakuwa very interesting. When we think about dictators, we think about dictators who end up being our friends. We think about dictators who end up being, najua, friendly to us. But what we forget is a dictator owes no one nothing, najua, and owes no one anything. A dictator is a dictator. A dictator can just wake up and be like, you know what? Sick and tired. of this YouTube nonsense and commentary, that needs to stop. If a dictator did that, anizangalia kitu kama iko nini ina feed like how many mouths? At least nikiangalia to the people who work within the organization, I'd say at least 6 mouths. So these 6 mouths zitakuwa bila dishi. And if we go to bigger organizations like akina Obina I think ana feed maybe even up to 15 mouths. Nacheki. Nishaenda kitu kama mic check unakuwa na at least maybe 12 mouths. All those would lose their jobs because a dictator won't care that kuna time amongeage politics as zingine ni banta. No, there are times we've talked about politics. So remember that show ya Obina that had millions of views, like 1 million views in less than 24 hours ya Gashagwa. A dictator won't let that. But kuna msata kwa this is more you're just looking at yourself and looking at how you have Nini, but what about the bigger picture? The bigger picture I'd still ask is what stops, like who said democracy can't work? If we are to look at countries, yes, right now China is advancing faster than the United States. But if we are to look at United States, it's still classified as one of the most developed countries in the world. And United States is still looked at as a beacon of democracy. Najua, it's the country where a president serves 4 years and goes for another term, and if he wins, stays, loses, fucks off. And States has always been the States. Of course, is it morphing into some third world stuff? Yes, it's morphing into some third world stuff because for the first time, US is starting to think of dictatorships and thinking of making Trump a life president. And this is supposed to protect Trump from, of course, prosecution. And also, it's supposed to somehow, kuna wazungu wana feel like they're losing America. So they feel like if a white president like that stays in power, it's going to help keep America white. So there's always going to be that. The same way, maybe say kama Ndindi Nyoro, your time will gonna feel like, this person is going to protect my interests. But so we can never say that democracy doesn't work. Because have we ever really tested democracy? I don't think so. If we look at Kenya's history, we'll say in 1992, multi-party vikaanza. Moi is said to have rigged the 1992 elections. Then what happens? 1997, Moi is said to have rigged the 1997 elections. 2002, a clean election. 2007, Kibaki rigged the election. So, how does democracy work? How can we say that democracy does not work when we've never truly tested it? If we've tested democracy in Kenya, we would not need all those agents. Because the truthful winner would always win. Why do we need agents? Because people steal. That's why tunanid my agents wote to counter check Form 34A, Form 34B, blah blah blah, Supreme Court ruling, all this nonsense. But wacha tusikie vile Ndindi ali end up akijustify.
Most of the time I come to this kind of shows. And I hope this is the last time I'm getting this question because I have always given a very definite answer. If you read my article, it was in the Daily Nation then, I talked about a figure called a benevolent dictator. And I want to teach you something, and I'm sure Manyora knows more about this. There are 2 kinds of dictators. There is a benevolent dictator, and there is a petty dictator. The word is not in reference to anyone to demean. It is just a definition. A benevolent dictator is a person like Deng Xiaoping, the one that I just referenced. Deng Xiaoping led China from 1978. The economy grew by over 10%. The Chinese people were able to stand up. Benevolent dictators are people like Lee Kuan Yew, a person who led with an iron fist, Singapore, and Singaporeans can look back and are proud of their leader because he was there to lead them and actually deliver fruits. A benevolent dictator is a person like
So nacheki hapo akipatiana kina Lee Kuan Yew and of course hizi Singapore ishatan into quotes into a democracy. They say China, of course China is still iko na chama chao cha mapinduzi, the communist the China's Communist Party, I think the CCP, and China, of course, China is one of those countries that you have to look at and admire because what China has changed into is amazing. And the Chinese system, kuna say, I remember kuna time hata nishaibongaga juu yake, kuna msee alikuwa anatry kuunderstand akiuliza is it communism or is it capitalism, alafu akasema that China is the only country where you can't actually say what's going on because it's the most capitalistic country and there's still a lot of communism. When you think about, when Ruto talks about being a dictator, he's talking about being a dictator because of people like Ndindi Nyoro. These are the people who've questioned why Safaricom should be sold. And according to Ruto, we are selling Safaricom so that we can have the NIF, National Infrastructure Fund. So he's wondering, like, why is this person blocking my thing? What if I could just do whatever I wanted without being blocked? But it's never that simple. If all this benevolent dictator was going to do was stop corruption, bring development, that would be okay. But what they're going to do is crush dissenting voices. Why? In any society, people will never agree 100%. There are always going to be people who are like, no, we can't do that. Let's say even when it comes to human rights, let's look at human rights. In a dictatorship, in a dictatorship we look at it politically. But if we are to look at something like, for example, gay and LGBTQ rights, hiyo watu wana exist and that's a fact. Ukitaka kuwa dictator utasema hafai ku exist, so nenda kuwachukua wote na nitawadelisha. Why? Because wanna do something against the Lord, blah blah blah. So that can be, that's a situation. And it's the same thing itakuwa na huyu mtu, mbona hataki tuanzishe hii National Infrastructure Fund? Huyu mtu ni anti-development, wacha tumrushe jela ama tumuue, ndio kila mtu abaki align ameenda in the same way. So I think that this argument here, benevolent dictators, it's such a lazy argument. Like, we've not tried out democracy and tested it out fully. Look at America. Nikiangalia America, na hii nenda kukatia msiflani to Alex Macharia, but be a big up to Alex Macharia, always watching. But tukiangalia America, this year kutakuwa na the midterms. So this after 2 years, Americans wata determine, like, these people, they've worked for 2 years, how many of them hapa maybe kwa hii Congress wamefanya kile wanafaa kufanya, how many of them kwa the Senate wamefanya kile wanafaa kufanya, wala hajafanya wacha waishie home. And that's democracy, and they're going to know the winner in a very short time. Wanajuaga winner ni nani. Sisi of course napatianaga 5 years, and in these 5 years the guy that we want to vote out can use violence and stay in office. So I'll never, nikisikia mse kama Ruto akibonga juu ya how dictatorships work, and this is the president, don't forget this is a president who became president because of a democratic process. During Uhuru's time, he didn't say that it's only a dictatorship that can save Kenya. Why? Because he was next in line and he was eyeing the seat, and he needed Uhuru to be democratic enough to step down. Kumbuka guys vitu zote, like in 2022 wasekaki na msanitwa nani Moses Kuria walikuwa washinda akiambia Uhuru, wewe maliza uende. Uhuru akamaliza akaenda. Saizi we in a situation whereby we are not sure kama Ruto atamaliza aende, because Ruto's plans are always, we want to be a first world country. Oh, in the next 30 years Kenya is going to be a third world country. Oh, look at this is my 5-year term, this is my 10-year term, but in the next 20 years, why? The best that you can get is 10 years. Do your best in 10 years. If you show us a certain level of excellence in 10 years, if the next leader comes in, we are going to expect him to maintain that. The same way, when Moi came out and Moi stepped down, we started getting things like easy freedoms za kuongea. And since then, we've held each president to that level, that you have to let us have freedom of expression. And we've always had freedom of expression. So the same way, if a president was to fight corruption and fight incompetence and fight all this nonsense that happens in Kenya, even if he steps down, the next president, we'd hold that next president to that same standard. And if they don't deliver, we'd... So, Historia, when I hear Ruto talking about a dictatorship, I get worried, because right now, he's the guy at the helm. And apart from that, right now, one thing that we've always supported is sisi kama wa Kenya tume support subconsciously, but tumekuwa tukisupport police brutality, and the time that we stopped supporting that was in 2024 after the Gen Z protests. But because this thing has been supported for so long, what has happened? It may end up ikikuwa hapo. So now the person in government can always use maximum force, and if they decide to stay in power, musikega saka we going, hakuna kitu mtadu. There's nothing we can do to a certain level, especially hii midterm, hii sasa ya midterm na ita 2027. If Ruto decided to unleash the police on us, they kuna kitu yote tutadu. We will occupy, hakuna kitu to occupy. So this is the reality. So hii speech ya nani ilinishtua sana, considering that mainstream media just brushed over it. There was no one who was going and asking like, why is this guy talking about this thing being a dictatorship, and why shouldn't we should not allow this, because this is unacheki, this is scary. Ekonene, najua mwaka ni mpya lakini injili ni ile ile lemfi. So kama uko US, uko UK, uko Canada ama uko the UAE na unatry kutuma do Kenya, baki umechangamka, ingia lemfi, utabaki umepata the most competitive rates. Lakini apart from that, on your first transaction ya $100 or more, utapata $20 sign up reward. So unangoja nini? Baki umechangamka, chap ingia lemfi, international payments for everyone. Ekonene. But tukitoka hapo, acha to go back to Wamushomba. So Wamushomba alikuwa kwa this same meeting, and before this same meeting she ended up posting a video, and this video was interesting because she's been like one of the biggest critics wa Ruto. Mother alianza ku criticize Ruto even before it was cool, but was she honest in her criticism ama she was playing us all along?
Yangu ni Ruto ya rais. Maendeleo na kazi. Siasa tutapita baadaye. Na niko nyumbani, niko State House kwa UDA. Kabisa.
Macheki. Amesema this year anataka maendeleo na kazi. Na hii ilibaki remind of last year. I think ilikuwa ni 24th of August 2025. Kuna vile Nairobi leo walibaki wamepost wakasema Babu Owino and Edwin Sifuna joined by other leaders attended a church service at Jesus Teaching Ministry JTM in Dome Home, Embakasi East. Alafu kwa the picture you would see Babu Owino akiwa hapo, unaona Sifuna, alafu who else do you see? Wamushomba. Yes, and there was a very clear picture of Wamushomba akiwa na Babu Owino wakiwa kwa hiyo church, and people started talking about this youthful party that was going to happen. But now what happens? She ends up joining Ruto, and I think this is also a lesson to a lot of people who think 2027 is going to be a very simple game. You have to understand that I think one of the things that happens with these African economies is the presidents have this much power whereby they can use public funds anyhowly. And these public funds that are being used anyhowly can be used to bribe like elected officials and make them switch parties. And I think that's what happened with this case, where mother amekuwa promised goodies, and that's why she's talking about development, because that's also a form of bribery. Najua if her constituency is going to get favors because she's supporting the president, it's a form of corruption in itself. And but this was interesting to see, because now I'd want to see what akina Babu Owino anasema. Yes, akina Sifuna, the ones who expected that she was going to stick with them and they were going to bring up this new Kenya that they were going to form. How are they going to feel about this, all this? It's interesting. Let me wait and see, man. That is interesting. So yes, Wamushomba amebaki ame-cross over to the other side. Nataka kuona nani, kuna time nani alikuwa anasema anaitwa nani huyu ubuda anaitwa Gachagua, kwa sababu kuna a lot of moles that are there working for Ruto. So did he expect this to happen? I don't know. But to go back to stories za Gachagua, of course one of the headlines ya this past weekend ilikuwa the church attack in Othaya, where kuna some kind of the president was involved. I remember doing a reaction to that, and I said it didn't make sense for the president to be involved politically because he gains nothing from that. But of course kumekuwa na more footage ile inaonyeshwa ya what happened to that place, and it was really chaotic. Yes, it was really chaotic. And kama kuna msana hop from one station to another akibonga juu story, of course ni ubuda anaitwa Malala. So Malala alikuwa ameishia KTN and akaulizwa juu story because bado they still the story that this was staged. So he was being asked, was this staged? Wacha tusikie.
I saw the Madeira MP trying to insinuate that those were goons hired by us. I want to ask the nation. I am a civilian. What powers do I have to convene police who are armed to come and implement my script? You saw very well in those videos. We have a GK vehicle, GKB 765X. We want to know who signed that work ticket, because all government vehicles, before they go anywhere, there's a work ticket that is signed. Was it an operation? The GK vehicle is there. 2 GK vehicles. One from Darangwa or something and another one from Muranga. The police officers and the area OCS was not briefed about this operation. The church is less than 100 meters away from the local police station.
Damn, nasikia hiyo. So, okay, this is okay. So, hii place inakuwa attacked iko less than 100 meters away. But from what I can see, from the information nimekuwa nikiona online, I can comfortably say I don't think the opposition choreographed this. But I can also say with authority that I don't think the president was involved. So who do I think was involved? I think it's one of those president people wale wako kwa ground, wale wako na feel kama na do the president a favor by making sure that Gachagua does not hold a meeting in such a place. And what ends up happening is this ends up helping Gachagua get more sympathy votes. Because don't forget, people like to root for the underdog. Najua. Does that mean that the underdog will win? No. We hope so. Najua, when you're rooting for one. But imanishagi that the underdog will always win. So, but wacha tuendelee.
No police officer from that local station came to our rescue. So I want to call upon the cabinet secretary to stop these hypocritic acts of issuing PR statements on his Facebook and Twitter handle and think that Kenyans can be fooled that this country is by any chance caring about them. We have reported 16 incidences. Since last year, we've had serious attacks. In 2024, we had an attack in Limuru. Our party leader was attacked in a funeral church service in Limuru.
Nakumbuka hiyo ilikuwa chaotic kabisa. Yeah, that was chaotic. Ilibidi nania scamper for safety. And it also showed you how much like African governments and their monopoly for violence. Because every time kuna bila livurugwa tu. Ilikuwa, it was not a joke. Compared to here Sunday, yeah, Limuru ilikuwa crazy.
In December, in Shamata, we were attacked. In Mwiki PCA church, you saw police officers and goons running into us in the PCA church. We have reported these incidences 16 times to no avail of success.
Okay. So, but hii story, pia tukistick na hii story, I think this is also one of those stories where it goes to show why supporting injustice waga kitu mbaya. Ile time Gachagua alikuwa deputy president, he was the sort of person who alikuwaga like serikali inafaa kutumia all means to stop any form of protest and any form of political meetings that was happening that was not supportive of the government. Then of course wakakosana Ruto. Now he's on that other side. And I'm sure if I was to check into Malara's record, I'll find the same shit. So it shows you that the same thing tukona toka kubonga juu Ndindi Nyoro and support for benevolent dictators. Because tukimalizia story ya politics, I guess, and nataka kurudi back to history ya benevolent dictators. I remember there are people who've been saying that a very good ticket for Kenya would be Ndindi Nyoro and Babu Owino. And I'd have to ask myself, how would this run? Who would be president and who would be deputy? Because let's say the president is Ndindi Nyoro, as people have been saying, because he's the older one, so he should run for president and Nani should be deputy. President and deputy, Kenya, Africa in general uko sana. Check even what's happening huko Masaida Senegal. Sonko na ule msee mwingine alishako sana tayari. That's just what happens. So Dende and Babu Owino watakosana. But kumbuka Dende, in his mind, he wants the best for Kenya. And what's the only way that he knows Kenya can go to where it's supposed to go? Is being a benevolent dictator. So that means that if we were to elect him, because this is something that he stuck with, this was something that he'd go to places and be there telling people, yes, Kenya needs a benevolent dictator, Kenya needs what? So if Dende was to end up being president, he'd want to be a dictator. So now the question is, if you don't want Ruto to be a dictator, should you want Ndindi to be a dictator? Dende? You see? And personally, I don't want that. I still feel like we can have a democracy. We can have someone who works for the people and does not need to maim. All they need to do is make sure that the judiciary knows tutacheck hizo bank accounts zenyu. If anyone receives a bribe and we end up with this nonsense ile tunaonaga where politicians are always found innocent of corruption, that has to stop. Najua cause sahizi even nani muoneaga Waititu huruma, because Waititu is the only guy who's not being found innocent. Kila mtu mwingine ni innocent. So but yes, so does Kenya need a benevolent dictator, and is Ruto supposed to be that dictator? According to IQ Watson, Ruto is the right guy. What about you? Baki umeniambia. Me personally, I don't want a dictator. I still want all these freedoms. Why? Because I know one day we'll get someone who works. And one day we'll get someone who does not have an appetite for public funds. One day we'll get someone who gets Kenya the best deal. One day we'll get someone who accounts for every shilling. And inamaanisha that if a stadium is supposed to cost 45 billion, Kenya will use 45 billion. Not 140 billion, nasemekana ingine medu. So inamaanisha with this 140, we'd have 3 Talanta stadiums. Maybe moja Nairobi, mingine Kisumu, ingine maybe let's say LD, because Mombasa, watu wanataka kucheza Mombasa kweli na ile hit yote. I don't know. Iko nene.